Graphic design defined. The what, how, where, when, and who of graphic design. Welcome to Graphic Design Defined. Over the coming weeks, we'll take you on a stroll through the technicolor world of graphic design. We will cover everything from the visual and psychological art of storytelling, including branding, typography, and logo design, to what to expect from a career as a professional graphic designer. This series of podcasts is brought to you by the British Academy of Graphic Design. Hello there, I'm Fiona Byrne. I'm sitting here with the Academy lead tutor, professional graphic designer, Sam Baker, and we're going to talk about the fascinating world of branding in graphic design. So Sam, can you just get us started on, I guess, how you would define branding and what it means from a graphic design point of view?
Yeah, branding goes back to obviously ancient times when people used to brand things they owned, if you like. So it goes back to sort of cattle farmers and kind of like days when you used to have minimal things of your own. So you used to brand them, so you used to stamp them, you used to put some sort of element of ownership onto these items or things. So and it kind of goes back to them, but it hasn't really necessarily changed in the way that we interact with it and see it and kind of understand it.
So graphic designers getting actually hot irons branded onto them and they start working.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of, yeah. I mean, if you think about a sort of, not that many people use them anymore, but a business card, you've got a very small amount of space to show off what it is you do or what the necessary information. And it's similar to a brand that, in the way that you kind of interact with it. So you need certain aspects on there to be able to understand what that brand does or what it's trying to get you to interact with.
Gotcha.
So, you can have your name and your stuff on there, but what else are you going to have? Are you going to have, I don't know, a color or a suggestion of what it is you do? So some sort of icon. And yeah, it all goes back to that original sort of stamping of goods, if you like.
Interesting. Yeah. So I guess like a business card, for example, your brand is on there. It's so much more though, obviously, than your name and your phone number, right? So what is it that a graphic designer will be looking at to put in to the brand? Where do you start with something like that? Because I know you're trying to represent many levels of what this product, service, or person is. So what would be your approach starting that?
It is tricky because if we talk about kind of personal branding, so you're going out into maybe as a freelancer or something like that, and you're going to try and gain work. So you're looking to brand your work or your sketchbook or your portfolio, if you like. And again, obviously your business card and everything that comes off the back of it. You've got to put in there a little bit of you, a little bit of what makes you as a designer. So I think the worst thing a brand can do is not communicate anything about what it is you do or your style or your kind of the way that you create things. So, I mean, I always suggest to students or sort of youngsters that are starting out in the sort of design industry that they make out what it is that it makes them. So I'm quite my personal brand is like a bolt head. And the way that kind of shape, that sort of hexagonal type shape, and then how it splits and stuff. So, and then obviously there's movement in that as well. So I kind of think of it right back at the start as to what am I and what will I help the company or the client do or show or say, and then I kind of put myself in their shoes and say, well, what do we need from a designer? And you kind of look at it from both sides. And like I say, the worst thing you can do is just put your name on there and in a relatively nice font, and it doesn't mean anything, or there's nothing in there that really says what you are.
Yeah. So when you sit down with a client and they're saying, right, I want to, let's say they're brand new branding,
Yeah.
Are you sort of, this is like a lesson in psychology as well, right? Because I guess what you're doing, you're saying, what do you want to express? I mean, so you're going to choose that certain element of that person, brand, product, whatever, right?
Yeah, I think it comes down to shape, and it comes down to how people see a certain shape, like I say about the hexagon and stuff in
Yeah.
mine. But it also comes down to color, and it comes down to also on the back of all of this, you've got legibility and hierarchy and all the stuff that, the fundamentals of design, as we've spoken about before. But I think the initial stage is what makes that company or that client special, what makes them maybe their USP or their kind of core audience that they're trying to interact with in some way, and then how do we show that with their brand.
Right. So what you're looking at then is color for,
Yeah.
well, many things, right? Color and typography, particularly in this particular case, say creating a logo. So talk to me then about, like, because I know color psychology is a huge thing in many areas of design. So how does that come into play then? Are you kind of looking at, say, the personality or the ethos of, say, a company, and you're going, okay, this feels like an orange. Do you
Yeah,
know
I
what I
think.
mean? Or how do you
Yeah,
go?
I mean, you'll meet different clients at different stages in their development of their brand, if you like, or their company, and some will come in with a preconception of what they want it to look like. I want it really, really sleek and whatever. And it's your job as a designer to kind of not necessarily influence them, but help them along the journey of the understanding behind what a color is and how it is associated with certain types of feelings or certain types of how it's viewed in the world. I mean, you've got obviously you've got on the back of all of this cultural differences as well, and how different cultures view colors is very important. So it depends on where they are in the world or how they're communicating to the clients within the kind of worldwide environment, if you like. So if they're generally Chinese based or something like that, you need to make sure that their color isn't seen as inverted commas death or negative. But also you've got on the flip side the American companies and stuff. You don't want to seem too negative or positive, depending on what your company is. So if you take it right back to funeral directors or something like that, you don't want to be going in there with a bright yellow and a bright orange and a really vibrant. It's quite as solemn, it's calm. You need to create an environment of sort of security, if you like. So there's certain colors you have to use in regards to that.
Is all this design chat suddenly stirring something up inside you? Head over to graphicdesignacademy.uk. You'll get loads of info on courses, flexible study plans, and easy payment plans. That's interesting, isn't it? Because, I mean, for people who are not necessarily educated in the actual kind of forensics of color psychology, all we know is that we just have a feeling, right? So we look at a thing and it either makes us feel comfortable or nervous or excited or amused and it's all that, right, combined in the right way. I mean, it's quite a balancing act, I presume, because then you've got your typography, got your message. I mean,
I think I mean, it depends. Like I say, it does depend on your client and their kind of awareness of how these colors are associated within maybe within their kind of business remit. And it kind of, you can go into it as a designer and also kind of explain it to the client, and you kind of say, look, what is your company? What does it do? What do you want it to be seen as doing? And then you kind of influence their color association and their typography off the back of it. So you say, look, okay, so you're a retail type client. You want to be seen as being vibrant or interesting. What colors do you think? And then they give maybe the wrong colors, and you kind of influence them to come back to a more of an orange or a red or a yellow or a green, and it's tonal values within there as well. And then off the back of that, maybe you start influence their sort of typography style or sense. And it is a balancing act, and it is a kind of, it is a conversation, and it needs to be. It can't just be one way. As a designer, you have to listen and absorb the information from the client to then be able to kind of construct something off the back of it that is relative to them. Because otherwise, if you do something which they don't agree with, or they haven't been kind of necessarily educated on, you're going to lose them somewhere along the way, and they're just going to be negative towards the whole kind of background, if you like.
And I guess as well, that's another area where a qualified, skilled, experienced graphic designer comes into play, because what they're bringing is a toolbox of all these different insights into how to use various, elements. But you have to have the right conversation, right? You don't just tell people what to do. You have to listen.
Yeah,
What you
yeah,
do
and
as
you
well
are.
in
Yeah, you are kind of almost, you are educating them,
yeah,
but you're letting them kind of almost educate themselves.
right.
Give them the materials, give them the tools, and then almost put them in your shoes and say, look, this is what I'm looking to do. Can
Yeah,
you see that from where I'm coming from? And I can see that from where you're coming from. And there's kind of like an amalgamation of it all in the middle somewhere, hopefully.
like a happy marriage. Yeah,
Yeah.
that doesn't ever exist, exactly. But I mean, considering as well, 99.9% of any kind of business in 2024 has an online presence, right? I mean, you really don't exist if you don't have a website or something.
Yeah.
So how do you traverse then that whole sort of cultural differences when it comes to branding for companies that are going to be globally viewed, so you can just log on anywhere in the world, but it might be interpreted differently.
I
Is this a
think it
bridge you've
depends
crossed?
on, yeah, it kind of, and yeah, it's very, very tricky, and it is something that you need to be aware of, obviously, because anyone anywhere can, well, generally can access the internet, and they're able to see your brand no matter where they are in the world. Um, you have to be aware of it, but it also kind of depends on. So not all companies necessarily are going to trade in all parts of the
True.
world. So you need to be aware of where they're trading or where they aren't. But you also need to be kind of aware of the fact that not everyone will. So it depends on the area that they're trading within, as in the location, but also the kind of the product and the service they're offering as well, because certain services and products aren't going to be necessarily viewed by everyone in the same way. It's a very tricky thing
Yeah.
to traverse between getting it right for everyone or not getting it right for anyone. It's kind of like, you're caught between the catch-22 quite
Yeah.
often.
Yeah, and I like, although it's a global marketplace, within that there's so many sort of enormous sub marketplaces
Yes.
too. So, I kind of understand that.
Yeah.
And because it's making me think as well, okay, obviously, if you are designing some sort of branding, right, you're going to have to consider the fact that it's going to go on various different platforms. So besides, like, say, different sizing and the technical end of things, I mean, it feels like that's a minefield as well. I mean, how does a graphic designer approach the idea of, okay, I've created a brand. This is a new company, for example. They're going to have, print, they're going to have digital, they're going to have social media, they're going to have web. Is there a different way of doing things? Have you noticed as well, if you're doing more and more of that now, it's a different
Mm.
approach to just straightforward designing?
Yeah, it's obviously when I started out, the internet was showing my age, but it was relatively new at the time. But it was slowly becoming, it was influencing your branding decisions, and like like scale and the type of logo that you produced, or the type of branding that you kind of imparted on documents and stuff.
Yeah.
You had to be aware of how that might look in an online world. So yeah, social platforms and stuff. But I think that the worst thing you can do from a designer's point of view is to be influenced by too many things like that too early on in the process. I always tend to educate students, or sort of new to the industry, sort of people that are coming into the industry as new, they've just qualified or whatever.
Yeah.
And I'd tell them, look, forget about try not to be influenced by the external world, because it's just going to affect you in so many different ways. You're not going to be able to make decisions. Sit down with a piece of paper, or your iPad or whatever, and get a pen, or probably a pen, because you don't want to be able to rub things out. It's the worst thing. And you
Okay.
just start creating a basic single color, but you use the
Yeah.
negative and positive space within that, and you start creating concepts and ideas off the back of it without being influenced by too much of what's
Right.
going on around you. And if you have a strong concept and a strong logo and a strong beginning, and that sort of seed at the beginning will always flow through. If you try and start to be influenced by social, by
Mhm.
website, by printed or billboard, anything like that, you're just going to be unable to make decisions, especially early on in the process. If you are coming to it a brand new brand,
Yeah.
the worst thing you can do is just be thinking too far along the line, if you like. You have to think about that eventually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it does go back to the bare bones, really, of design, which is it all starts with imagination, it starts with the artist, the designer, and the person. And but have you ever been in a situation where you've come up with something great and gone, oh, it's not going to work digitally, or it's not going to work? Does that ever really happen?
Yeah, sort of. So sometimes you'll create a logo and it works perfectly within 2 dimensions. So a printed or a flat logo on a website, or just a sort of branding element within social, and you think great. But then they start going, well, could we potentially animate this logo? And you're like, it almost needs a secondary thought behind it, and quite often you can kind of shoehorn it in a little bit. But because imagery and kind of video stuff is becoming much more interactive, and the way that people see it it's everywhere. You have to be now more aware of how that might look animated, or how that might look within an animated sense, if you like. So you do need to think about it more. I mean, I've had logos that I produced years ago, like sort of 20 years ago, come back and they've gone, right, we need to start thinking about animating this somehow. And I've almost had to tweak the design a little bit, which is not a bad thing necessarily, because after a certain amount of time, a logo can become, stale or whatever. If you look at, companies throughout time that have had the same name but changed their logo, Coca-Cola and Espresso and BP and all these types of companies, Apple as well.
Because consistency is key, right? I mean, it needs to be identifiable. Actually, there are some companies though who changed their logos over time, and they were disastrous, right? I mean,
they usually revert quite quickly. There's been quite a few in the last few years that have put a new logo out. It's been received terribly across all media. And they literally just send it back within a week.
I'm thinking of one brand.
Millions on it, millions and millions on this rebrand, and it's just not worked. Which can happen. It's all about kind of the rebrand thing is a whole new ball game, and you have to be aware of what the company's done before and what it's looking to do now, and then the type of audience and stuff. You're basically creating a new brand, but by being influenced by the previous.
I wonder as well, especially kind of kids out of college kind of thing, really young, they probably think more 3-dimensionally than maybe you did when you were in college. Do you know what I mean? Because I don't think you're a dinosaur already.
Probably. I do see things in a 3-dimensional sense a lot more now, just because I'm kind of hardwired into it. But yeah, you are right. I think they, the way that, well, even if you go boil right back to kids. So I've got a 4-year-old and like an 8-month-old, and they interact with screens like I've never. It's just beyond.
It's incredible, right? It's like they were born with them in their hands.
So they have a completely different sort of interactive sense of what branding and what kind of visuals and almost buttons and stuff like that, and colors and stuff. It looks different to them probably. But you have to bear them in mind, because that's the future.
And I suppose that means that as much as you wouldn't approach the origin of a design being overly influenced and being put off, I guess, by all the different areas that it needs to translate into, maybe the approach will begin from a different point of view in the middle of that, as in my first design is going to be in a 3-dimensional sense, so it'll actually translate and adapt easier, digitally.
I mean, you can create. So some illustrators will create stuff, branding icons and stuff like that 3-dimensionally first, potentially, or at least consider it in a very initial stage, and then they'll create a flat version of it. I'm kind of the more old school. I'll start with a flat and then look that it could be 3-dimensional if I did this, that, and the other to it. Everyone, each to their own. People
is one more difficult than the other to translate?
Maybe you'll get some things that work really well in a 3-dimensional sense, and you'll get some stuff that just doesn't work 3-dimensionally.
Right.
It depends on what it is and the audience as well.
Gotcha.
If you want to hear the rest of this chat,
Make sure to tune into the next podcast of Graphic Design Defined.